appreciate it. If you've been to, I think it's called Guitar Center, that'll put it into perspective. I've been in this business for quite a long time now. It's a shocking amount of time. And this kind of devotion is what I grew up with. And I mean, our original store, although it was a mere shadow of this, it was certainly really funky. But there was a passion and a love there that transcended the big box movement that's taken over so much of the world in pretty much every business. But we always thought musical instruments were special. Something my dad taught me when every time he opened his sax case, and oh man, I could smell the history coming out of that thing. Jeez, wow. And you know, one of the first things that he told me that I never forgot was about musical instruments, and that they have the life of the room because they inspire the spirit within. A good one at any rate. And that they also, a proper one, has no defined lifetime. It should go on forever. So look at this saxophone. Do you know whether that was made 50 years ago or 2 weeks ago? You can't tell the difference. So, big props. This is a rare treat for me to be at a place like this. First time I've been out here, and it exceeds everything that I've been told to think about. So, George, wow, and I hope you all appreciate what you got. My grandmother came to California in a covered wagon. And the reason why that's important, for me at any rate, because I think a bit of her pioneering spirit rubbed off on me. I got a good dose of that. And she was a character too. She was 9 years old on the trip. So she remembered it, not fondly, by the way. And I remember sitting there talking to her and said, isn't that amazing? You know, think about this, in the span of your lifetime, you came to California in a covered wagon, and you flew back to New York City in a 747 jetliner. What do you think about that? Distant look off the she said, well, you know, the airplane was better. She had very little concept of it. But again, the thing is, I think I did get a dose of her pioneering spirit. And you know, when I asked her more about the trip, it was interesting. One of the most interesting things was they didn't know when they had arrived because they didn't know what their destination was. Now you think about when we travel these days, we know where we're going, we know where we're going to end up. And most people, I've even started to pick this up, analog vacuum tube guy like me, you know, where you punch in and your cell phone tells you turn left and 200 feet, that kind of thing. It knows where you're going, you know where you're going. The idea that she didn't know and they didn't know where they were going, so they didn't know when they had arrived. What's the tie-in, you ask? I think that's the way we develop products a lot of times at Mesa Boogie. And the contrast is kind of cool because, for example, on the bass amps, the two bass amps, something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. Thank you, Mr. Medina, right there. Stand up, Medina. My passion was the big tube amps, and there's not a huge market for it, but it was something I wanted to do just for the sake of doing it. And of course, it spun off in myriad directions. It took far longer. I said, oh, it's not going to take that long. I'm just going to update the base 400 plus. You know, it's kind of an icon. Sir Paul's still using his after 30 years or so. Main thing that forced us to discontinue it was that it no longer complied with the safety regulations. Otherwise, you know, and of course, nobody ever got shot. They never caught on fire. That was just a bureaucratic deal. But the point I'm getting to about the destination and not knowing where you're going was, it kept going on and on and on. It was like, oh, it would be cool if we did this. Well, yeah, it's a great idea. So go back 10 steps backwards and you, yeah, but you know what? We should have done this too. And you know, at one point I made the issue. I said, I know the guys at Yamaha just a little bit. And I'd like to contrast the way they would have done the bass amp. They would have talked to their sales staff and they would have said, okay, here's what we need based on what's selling and this product and that product, and we need these features and it's got to be at this price point, right? And then some big boss would have approved that, hopefully. Then they would have turned it over to engineering, and engineering, they put the blinders on, okay, this much power, this looks like this, and the product comes out, period, it's done. And knowing Yamaha would have been a solid, good product too, right? I mean, Yamaha makes good stuff, I think. But I don't know if it's got the soul, and I don't know if the soul that we put in there is part of that pioneering spirit about, gee, we're lost, we're just wandering aimlessly, not quite blindly, in search of greatness. And we know it when we find it, but we don't know it ahead of finding it. Does that make sense to anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're looking for the hook, right? You're looking for the great tone and the great hook. You don't know what it is until you hit it, and then you recognize it, and then, oh man, what was that? Well, geez, I gotta remember that. So, I guess you could say a lot of that is just a passion that makes this job interesting, and it's why I still like to do it. Let me bore you with a couple of background stories, because I always get asked about this. How did you get interested in electronics? And what did you study? Where did you learn your electronics? Never took an electronics course in my life. Not in high school, never, ever. And as you can see, I don't think that held me back a lot. I think that was a virtue only in this realm of music and instrument creation, because it defies common engineering experience. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. What happened a long time ago that got me interested in building cool things, especially electronically cool things, was Boy Scouts. I went for a merit badge that I really wanted. I thought it was going to be real easy to get, and I needed one more merit badge to win the contest over the summer, or who got the most, because you get this cool little medal that I coveted. So the easiest one was wood carving. It simply said, carve 3 things. And so I carved 3 things, and I made an appointment with the guy who was the merit badge counselor. And when he answered the door, I started to get this sinking feeling. First, it wasn't a door in a regular house. It was a garage door that had been boarded over, but there was a little cutout that I could see opened as a regular door because the garage door. Anyway, so I knock on that. This big tall guy looks like Dirty Harry, opens the door, looks down, and yes, I'm here with my carvings. He opens the door, step in, and immediately I'm looking at this incredible shop, all of these tools and stuff he's building. It's like, wow, this is amazing. So we follow me, we walk across the room. This is a bandsaw. Give me your carvings. Stacks my 3 things up. Let me show you how the bandsaw works. Turns it on. That's an informed easily. Turns off the bandsaw, looks at me, tosses them into the bin, and turns around. And I'm like, dumbfounded, right? These guys side you off, and it's easy. And the guy says, that's what I think of the work that you did. That's what I think of you. Wow, I'm getting moved heavily here. He says, what you got to learn, son, is that whenever you make something, you're leaving behind an artifact of who you were and what your values were at that time. I don't think that's who you are. I don't think what you showed me is the best you could do, or if it is, we're finished right here. You can just leave. I'm just a little kid. I really wanted that merit badge. Anyway, long story short, I was in that guy's, and I went over there every day for it seemed like 3 or 4 weeks. And yeah, he had me carving everything. He showed me his carvings. He had me sharpening tools. He had me cleaning up. And you know what? Wood carving was just a little side hobby of his. What the guy really did was he manufactured in his garage shop there one-of-a-kind, mostly control systems for industry. And while I was there over the years, because I came really close with the family and his older son, he made, well, for example, one of the biggest projects was the control panel for the heating and air conditioning on the USS Nautilus submarine. This guy built that. So that's how heavy it was. Above and beyond what the stuff was, and a bunch of it was things like control system panels for a refinery. I remember that was one. Another thing was some machinery that did packaging and that put 12 little boxes into a carton and closed the carton. And it was just tricky stuff. But when I looked at it, there was an artistry and an attention to detail that totally sucked me in. And I wanted to do it just because it looked cool. But I had no idea. I can't say it work. And if I could just make it look as cool as the way his wiring comes up and it's a perfect right angle and this little valve is just exactly right. There was artistry in everything that he did, and that grabbed me. And luckily, his son, 4 years older than me, was just getting into making ham radio gear. And so I said, geez, well, I want to do that too. So using the old man's shop tools and stuff, we were able to fabricate the metal chassis, learn about that, punch the holes in, tear apart TV sets, get a power transformer on the TV, build a shortwave transmitter and debug it and get it to work, which is a huge part. Now, building is one thing, getting something to work and debugging it is another whole level. I was just thinking about that not long ago. Oh, right, it didn't seem to work as all my friends would say, yeah, we hear you loud and clear. This is Morse code. That was all we could do, at least until far later. They can hear me fine, but I can't get anywhere outside of the neighborhood. What's the deal? And so finally, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I get this letter from the FCC in Alaska. So I'm coming in loud and clear, but I want some frequency that's completely unauthorized. Well, I had one of the coils that you had to hand wind these coils, and I had it backwards. I had it tapped from the wrong end, and so I got that figured out. Anyway, the big learning process. Steve over here, wherever he is now, had a great line. He said, because I was telling him, I said, you don't know, just getting the great tone out of an amplifier is one huge thing. Getting rid of all the pops, clicks, hums, and everything else that no one's aware of if you're completely successful is oftentimes even a bigger challenge. So what did you call that? He said, yeah, getting rid of all the things that you couldn't find to complain about.
It's a little parasitic issues we work so hard under the guys.
I can't hear you, I'm half deaf.
I was just saying all those little parasitic issues that we work so hard to make sure that we clear up so they're never an issue for the standard player.
Right. And I compare it to the body shop that does a perfect job getting rid of the dent on the car. I was like, what dent? I don't see any dent. Yeah, right, because they did a perfect job and you don't get any credit for all the, the fact that you don't see the dent anymore. And I don't expect credit for the fact that when you turn on the power switch, you don't get electrocuted. Certain cases. I didn't really have any money growing up. I was lucky to grow up in a good town and have a good education, and that was very fortunate. I had a couple of really good school teachers that really inspired me. By the way, they're the ones that kicked my butt again, just like the guy in the shop. They were the ones that made the difference, not the one, good boy, very good job, good, worry about your self-esteem. No, that did nothing for me. I didn't even pay any attention to that. So, after all of the amplifier, modulator, transmitter, receiver building stuff, I hit that age where I was able to get a car, right? Cars go, rock and roll, that sort of took over. I lived in a place where the streets were all really windy, twisty, little mountainy roads and all that, and I always liked sports cars. All my friends all had Bug-Eyes. I had a little Bug-Eye Sprite, which is a terrific little car, and especially character building, because the thing breaks, especially when you're a teenager and you're trying to make it into a semi-race car. And you got the headers and the high compression pistons and the hot cam, and you don't know what you're doing, right? And as I found out later, that I said, man, those engines they wouldn't hardly last a year. And now for a year, you can't get a year out of one. You do all that to you're lucky if you get 3 months out of it before it's like blowing oil. So that was a very big learning experience that came to help me later. Now you probably all know we had a great music store, and here's how that came about. The rock and roll connection. Again, my dad was a musician. My sister was a really good piano player. There was music all around all the time growing up. My dad was going to teach me the horns, because that's what he liked, the reeds. And frankly, there really wasn't a lot of opportunities for a clarinet player in a rock and roll band. I had played the clarinet for 10 years anyway, so drums, okay, yeah, I got rhythm, at least I think. I mean, how hard is it just to bang on the thing? So it turns out we all set the drums. And pretty soon, I was in a little band. And we would have gotten really famous because we were almost at the right time. We were in San Francisco Bay Area, in Berkeley at the time that all of the bands, the whole San Francisco sound was coming. And I can summarize the only two things that kept us from really hitting the big time in that era was that we couldn't play and we had no charisma. Other than that, we met well. Anyway, until one night on the gig, of course, my friend, the keyboard player's Sun 200 blew up. Now this was true. Everything was tubes in these days. How to talk about that, in case you don't know. All the transmitters, all of that stuff, it's all tube stuff. All of the amplifiers that the band had, it's all tube stuff. So literally, it was a dramatic flame out of that Sun 200. And he's really worried because it's like, oh man, I can't get a new amp. You know, we don't have any money. And I said, well, let me see if I can fix it. He didn't know about the ham radio stuff, so he's like, whoa, you're not touching my amp. But your amp is, you know, smoking toast. Anyway, long story short, took it apart, went down to the store, bought a bunch of resistors and stuff, fixed it, and it worked again. And he was floored. And to me, that was just normal. You don't have any money, you want to keep your life going. You got to fix your stuff, the car, everything. You know, you just got to do it because you can't afford to pay somebody else to do it. Well, he came from a little bit different universe and background, but he had the killer idea. He said, 2 days later, he said, hey, you know what, let's open a music store together. Now that floored me because I was so far removed from anything I ever would have thought of. I don't know how George thought of it, other than he loves the stuff and wanted to make a business of, you know, having his passion for good musical gear. So anyway, he said, the music store what? He said, well, I know you can fix stuff. You know, I think there's going to be a big need for that. Look at all the bands around here. There's only one guy down in Oakland, Clyde Blackwell, who was a certified criminal. Fixing amplifiers. It really didn't take any time at all before literally he was so right. Well, first of all, we rented this little Chinese grocery store in Berkeley. Altogether, it was about the same square footage of this stage. It had a little meat locker in it that I converted into my little amp lab back there. I went to the flea market, bought an oscilloscope and a signal generator. Those two cost me $25, which I was able to scrape up. And then a kid came by with a meter. I said, I don't have a voltmeter. The kid came by with money he'd stolen from school, but he wanted $10 for it. So, okay, now I got a meter. And sure enough, man, because Fender amps are so cool, I appreciated them most of all pretty early on. But I thought, if I'm going to be professional, I got to be able to take care of everything. I got to be able to fix it. So I can fix every BS Honer weird electric piano that used glue to, you know, that literally like, you know how the glue is on a Post-it, which it always had a certain amount of stick. Well, there was a Honer keyboard that one of the bands used that's the way it worked. It had these reeds, and the keys literally had stickum on them. And when you hit the key, the reed would pull up until the stickum let go. Can you imagine what that's like? And then you get dog hair and dirt and dust and everything in there. And it was just, these are nightmare things. So, and then I got to the point where there was, I really got pretty good rep. Literally truckloads, you know, all of the bands from the Bay Area were bringing truckloads a year. And I got to the point where I really don't want to be fixing that stuff because you're going to blame me when it's sitting there fizzing and buzzing and all that, which is part of the Homer tone thing in those days. one moment that I'll never forget was this, and it was early on, this van, big van pulled up. And this big burly guy with a big beard and everything gets out. Dave Fraser from Country Joe and the Fish. Anybody remember that band? Yeah, cool. I was hanging around with Barry Melton a year or so ago, and he said, do you realize that, just a second here, I'm having a senior moment. What's the band? Led Zeppelin. He said, do you realize that Led Zeppelin opened for us a few times? And I said, no, I never knew that. So that puts you into perspective. They were a big deal at the time. Anyway, this guy, Dave Faison, says, we're going on the road and I want to make sure this stuff is really reliable. He says that, he's opening the door to the van and the dual Sherman head fell out. He said, this guy takes a little beating and bam, the thing lands right on the street right in front of him. Okay, I'm getting it here. So, that didn't fact, every fender that I fix and every Mesa Boogie has been through the brutalizing hammer test, which is exactly what it sounds like. Turn the amp way up loud and just start banging on it with a hammer. And all of us have got a keen diagnostic sense of whether that amp is solid or whether there is something that we need to go in there and try to suss out before it causes a problem somewhere. Now, most of the time, yeah, those problems are just tubes, but still, if a tube goes down on the gig, your amp went down on the gig. And, you know, it's sort of like, yeah, the car didn't break, but you got a flat tire, you're still stuck. You know, it's not that comforting that it was just a tube, but it still messed up your evening. So the hammer test, that's where that came from, and that's been a big deal. We got the idea to open a second store over in Mill Valley because Berkeley was sick of Berkeley, the riots and all that. I was finished with university over there. 5 years, I didn't graduate. I'm proud of being in the same category as Bill Gates and that other guy, Steve Jobs, who went to college and never graduated. I just got in the wrong business. No, they did. No, wait, I'm in the right business. They're in the right business. But a guy walked out of our store and he was so impressed. He said, wow, what a great store. We had a store like this over in Marin, over in Mill Valley. Well, most of the musicians who were making it in the Bay Area, and even a lot of ones from elsewhere, were moving to Marin County at that time. You all know where Marin is, right on the north side of the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful, and it's very close to San Francisco. It was a fairly affordable at that time, although we couldn't afford it. So we closed daylight and closed the door. After that guy walked out, so there should be, we looked at each other, oh no, he's not going to beat us to it. We said closed. We went over and we rented a place that very day. And the first customer that came in was John Cipollina. Now, anybody remember Quicksilver Messenger Service? Yeah, good. We got some veterans here. Yeah, we're talking back in the 60s and so forth. Anyway, long story short, that store, croon music. I had a repair shop in the back. We moved down the street later into a much bigger location. And it became the hang. We didn't sell a lot of stuff, but boy, in fact, the guy, what was his name, Larry Thomas, who happened to have found this outfit called Guitar Center. I ran into him one time at a trade show, and he said, Randy, you know, you and Crew Music, we could never keep up with you guys. And I'm laughing. I was like, what do you mean you could never? How much I thought you just got $200 million for your ownership of, I said, no, I'm not talking about that. I said, we couldn't pay the rent. It was like, we got the rent and the electric bill. Who could we hold off next? And he said, no, I'm not talking about that. But you guys were the hidden place. Your back room, oh man, that back room did have some history. Matter of fact, I think the ceiling is still coated with, you know, Maui Wow, you know, you name it. Residues everywhere you look. Everybody came through that store. And one of the guys who was just a local player was Carlos Santana. He was just one of tons of players. In fact, at that time, his brother, George, had this band Malo that was, in many people's minds, surpassing the Santana band. Carlos was a great guy, and he always would tell me, he said, man, I can't get these notes sustained, man. Wait a second, I think I got to back on. This one thing goes back to Barry Melton and the country show and the fish. These guys asked me later on, after I've been dealing with them for several years, here's a Fender Princeton, this little, you know, Princeton, 10 watts or 12 watts on a 10-inch speaker. Is there any way you can boost this or just do something to freak out Melton? And so he just blows his mind and he doesn't even know what happens. Man, I would love to do this. Because of that little Lug-Eye Sprite, one of the things wrong with it is just got this little tiny engine. I always dreamed about putting some much more serious engine, a little small block V8 or a little aluminum V8 or something. You know, man, would that ever be so cool? You know, a little sleeper with a lot of power. And so, man, I was on that project. Now, one of the amps that came through Croon was basement number 410, Tweed basement number 0004. And we were all into blues rock. And so that amp was iconic because we knew the heritage and we knew what those amps were capable of. And I happened to, in my research, to come up with a schematic for one of those. So, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rebuild this Princeton to be a 410 basement. And when stripped the chassis, cut big holes in it, put big transformers in it that I got from Fender. And then the last thing was, wow, that little 10-inch speaker is never going to hold it. If you did it exactly right, you could get a 12-inch JBL D120 in there. And it had to be exactly right, or else the spokes would hit the transformers and they would top and bottom. But it would go in there. That's what I did. So I had it all done, and I kept it absolutely bone stock looking, because that's part of the whole sleeper appeal, right? So I take it out to the front, and Carlos is hanging around saying, Carlos, would you plug into this? You know, come on, Princeton? No, plug into this. Oh, man. Princeton? He said, no, I messed with it, I modified it, tried it. Well, as you know, Carlos is a player who banks on inspiration. When he's inspired, there's no telling what he's going to do, but it's going to be great. But he plugged into that little thing and started wailing, and it was a summer afternoon, we had the doors open, and literally, people were blocking the sidewalk, just going, what's going on in here? This is so amazing. And when he finished, his little, he just looks there and goes, shit, man, that little thing really boogies. So that is where that name comes. And that started me on the road to boosting Princeton's and some Deluxes, but I really liked the Princeton because they were even smaller, so it was even more of a joke. And then one time I heard these kids coming in there and said, man, I got a Princeton, and it just doesn't sound anything like Carlos. He just, he was a winner like that. Fill an auditorium, and he can barely, fill the garage with money and all that sort of thing. I've taken this sleeper thing too far. I need to put some kind of a badge on it. I'm not going to call it Boogie. So that's what I learned silk screening, because where am I going to go? I'm going to go to a nameplate company and say I need 5 or 10 nameplates. So I taught myself how to silk screen, which isn't really that difficult, and started making these little plates that we could put on the amplifiers that said Boogie. Now, other people ask me, well, where does the name Mesa come from? Well, times were so tough that I had to moonlight a couple other jobs. And two of them were, the main two were rebuilding Mercedes-Benz engines, because I bought an old Mercedes from a neighbor who bought this otherwise perfect Mercedes, but it had this huge rod. I mean, I could turn that off. You're going to blow it up. And he said, no, I just bought this a perfect car with this rod on it, but I've taken it, it's going to be like $1,100 to get it fixed. I don't have that. So he ended up selling me the car for $25 more than I bought it from him. Having all this experience with the butter right, take the engine out, take the engine apart, see, oh wow, this bearing just failed, take all the parts down to Jake's machine shop, and I'll never forget Jake going back and forth between the cylinders and his micrometer in the plug, and he comes back to me and he said, how many miles does this have on it? I said, it's got 97,000. He said, there is no measurable wear here. So you can just put those original pistons back in. You need some bearings, and I'll turn the crank under size 10,000, you're good to go. It cost me $75 for all of the parts and his outside labor. So I started this little business because that was such a righteous car that all my friends and a whole lot of other people ended up buying these old Mercedes from the late 50s and early 60s. Now, I wouldn't do anything else to them, just the engine rebuilds, because that was usually, they were run out. They had, they're 20-year-old cars with a ton of miles on them. Big lesson there was, wow, look at the difference between the Mercedes engine build quality and the British build quality. How we won the war and not them. Because it was incomparable, but it was this big lesson of the virtue of doing things right. And those Mercedes engines, any of you guys are engine freaks, they were jewels, they were work of art, they never leaked oil, they were incredible. Whereas the British engine always leaks oil, no matter what you do. It leaks, it burns, it's it. Anyway, so those other gigs, rebuilding the Mercedes engines, and again, necessity being the motivator here. I bought this house that was falling down. It was in Marin County, way out in West Marin, on 2.5 acres, cost $15,000, 1.5. Again, this was about 1960, I don't remember, mid to late 60s, 67, something like that, I don't know. In order to keep the house from literally falling down, I had to jack it up. And I talked to some old Edward Murphy. And he said, yeah, my brothers used to call me the Mole, which is a name I adopted. And I said, well, how come you're the Mole? He said, because I was the skinny guy. I could crawl the furthest back under there and dig out all of the mud and muck and get the rotten wood out and make a trench and pour the concrete on, which is exactly what we have to do. I asked him, I said, well, what about the jacking up part? He said, it's easy. The only thing you want to do is open all the windows first, or you're going to break them. Because I didn't break any of them. But literally, when I measured this house, it went like this, and then the end of it went like that. And there was no summer cabin, and it was 18 inches off for being level. I didn't get it all the way up. There was still 2 inches. I got too frightened because it was just creaking and groaning. I got it all. But that's good enough. That's good enough. So that became the beginning of the first home tone. I can still remember laying out the Mesa Engineering logo on the kitchen table. You all thought I lost my track. I will at several times along the way. What was I talking about 2 minutes ago? I'm serious about that. Anyway, because I needed some other name. You couldn't call them and say, yeah, this is Boogie Engineering to Mercedes. This is Prune Engineering. Prune, you know, you couldn't use those. I needed a truckload of ready-mix concrete. No, so you know, just on the spot, I came up with Mesa Engineering, and that's where that name came from. So you could call up, you know, Mercedes and say, you know, you could order some camshaft bearings or something. It's Mesa Engineering. Oh yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah, you guys, sounds legit. Matter of fact, then I needed to build a shop next to this ramshackle house that at least wasn't falling down anymore. And one of my friends, who has since become pretty famous, Larry Cragg, anybody ever heard of his name? He was one of the Prune fellas. I introduced him to Neil Young. Now see, here's where I'm getting off on a tangent that I'm going to forget where I was going. Which way do I go, left or right? Remind me about Larry Cragg, because it's a good story too. Anyway, and he said, he was living up further up north, and he said, man, you know, there's this place called Al Thrasher Lumber that you can buy redwood for $35, 1,000 board feet. And I said, well, that can't be right. It must be $350, no, $35. It's grade 4. It's, every one of them is supposedly got something wrong with it. So I went, you know, so I designed this building to be built out of the lumber. You could get 1x6 or 2x6. That's all you could get. And I went up there, and first I had to stop at Barnes to get the fir for the framing, because that Doug fir is what you need, and it grows there. These are the days where the lumber mills were still in business up there. Anyway, so I loaded the biggest Hertz flatbed truck I could rent, and I loaded that up, and then I went up the rest of the way to Thrashers, and I got all the redwood that I needed. And I kept telling the guy, and he's loading it on there with a big, you know, giant lumberyard forklift. I said, man, move it to the side because the truck body is sitting on the tire here. And I'm like, and he said, but you're so overloaded. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, you're not going to make it. And I said, well, we can just get it so the tires aren't rubbing. I think that's worth a try. And I said, no, there's a way station down. Don't you know, north of Willits? I said, well, I'll just pay the fine. He said, it doesn't work that way. They're going to pound, you're going to have to unload, get below the weight, pay the fine. They won't let you go. Oh, jeez, I'm freaking out. So I kind of know that stretch of Highway 101, and I'm coming down, and I'm, okay, we're going to divert. I was with my friend, just came back from the Peace Corps. And so we took some back road, and then we went on some dirt road, and then we're out going through some pear orchard where there is no road. And we came to another dirt road, and it came back to a slightly paved road that came back to 101, and we missed the way station all that. And long story short, we did make it, and then the truck got stuck trying to get it up the driveway. We had to unload it by hand, move the truck, and then load it all the gear. Literally carry the whole building board by board up this real steep driveway. Man, I paid some dues when I could go on the roof and start moving about this stuff. Whew. Okay, now, let's go to the left and talk about Larry Cragg just for a minute. Part of my repairing was, I got a call, it's like, hey, we gotta take you down to Neil's ranch, Neil Young's ranch down here, you know, it's south of San Francisco, because he's getting ready to go on the road and, you know, needs somebody to check out his amps. The guy who's invited me down said, you're the guy, I can't do it. So I got down there. Anyway, long story short, I'm working with Neil, who's a very smart guy, and very tough, very hard to please guy, because he is smart and he is focused and he is diligent, and he was just the toughest guy you could deal with to make him happy. But then when he was happy, he was really happy. So long story short, I end up, I think all the answers doing fine and dandy and all that, but I get this call in the middle of the night, literally, it was around midnight, from this guy named Leo Makota, who was a retired Green Beret, who was the road manager, because the tour, this was the Broken Arrow Ranch tour, this was the tour behind the Harvest album. Anybody remember that? That was one of his greatest. Phone rings midnight. What? And he said, "This is Leo. I got a full first-class ticket on Northwest American that departs San Francisco at 2 a.m. getting into Madison at dawn. You will be on that." Whoa, Leo, wait a minute. I'm like, "You will be on that flight. I'm hanging up now." And I said, "What was that?" I said, "I can't believe what that was." And she said, "Well, you better go." I said, "Yeah, I guess I better." Toolboxes, and I go down there. "Yeah, Mr. Smith, we got a first-class ticket for you here, so that's pretty cool." I arrive at Madison, and the sun is just coming up. And what I didn't realize in the winter is it doesn't come up like this. It comes up like this. It just goes along horizontally. It never really came up. So I'm standing there, okay, here comes my toolboxes, and I'm on the conveyor here, and I'm starting to reach for it. And then this, I've never seen this before, the chauffeur in a full livery with buttons and everything, "Sir, I'll get those." And he grabbed it. Whoa. So I go out, and the limo is parked right out in front. As I approach it, I don't know if we're riding a limo. Man, how cool is this? The back door opens. There's Leo Makota. He's got a buck knife with about a 7-inch long blade that's got a string of cocaine from one end to the other. And he's like, "Here, take this, and you're going to need it." Anyway, that was full-on rock and roll, I tell you. That was a private jet, and I mean, a private jet would make as many as 3 trips. It would be the crew, 1 trip, the band, 1 trip, and Neil, the 3rd trip. Not all the time, but if it was short enough, that would be, it would just at your service. That's the way it rolled. There was a problem with Neil's old black, his Les Paul, and there was one part in the show that was just hanging every single night because of an intonation problem, and he tuned it with one chord would be in tune, and the other chord would not be in tune, and it was a 2-chord deal, and it was just like, oh God, I was just agonizing. And the one thing my dad taught me was intonation, get in tune, dude. And so I got on the phone with Larry Craig, who I mentioned earlier, who was the guy, another hippie guy that signed up with Crew Music, who taught himself how to fix guitars the same way I taught myself how to fix and build amplifiers. And I was mentioning it to him, I said, "Larry, there's this issue with Neil's guitar, man, and whatever, it won't be in tune on these 2 different reasons." "Oh, I know that problem. He said, you can cure that." And I said, "Really? How do you cure that?" He said, "Well, you have to take off the tune-o-matic bridge, put it upside down on a couple of blocks, and beat on it with a hammer and put more arch in it." And I said, "Not in my lifetime, man. That's not done. No, beat on that thing, it's going to break. And then what? Do you think I'm in trouble now?" I was just dealing with amps, but if I had a deal, "Sorry, I broke your bridge." And I'm not going there. He said, No, trust me, it actually will work." And I said, "But it's popping." He said, "No, but it bends a little bit." So I very carefully did it. And I told Neil, I said, I don't know. And that night at the show, hit the 1 chord, he was in tune, hit the other chord, he was in tune, he goes. After the show, big hugs, he was just like, and I said, "Man, don't hug me, that's Larry Craig. You need to know Larry freaking Craig." And so here's what happened with Larry, man. He is just a real sweetheart. He ended up doing Springsteen's guitars, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, because I was part of the whole group that we were all working with in those days. He even played on stage with Neil and still does. I said, "What did you play?" And he said, "Well, I played banjo, I played D3 Hammond, I played baritone sax, and steel guitar at various times." I said, "Man, what?" He said, "I got to thank you because that made my life. I got the gigs, and anyway, you see how things just go from the unpredictable to where you couldn't have, you couldn't have written the story, really, if you had planned it out like, okay, here's how we're going to do it. It's going to be perfect. Now, at this point, does anybody have any questions while I'm thinking of what next I want to reminisce about? No? No questions. Okay, so you like hearing the stories about the rock stars and stuff? Yes, sir.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I called Steve-O panicking a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
I had a rehearsal at my house. Randy, several years ago, gracefully made me a Mark I. And it's like, it's my child, then the Mark I, then the rest of my life. So anyway, I had a rehearsal at my house, and we finished the rehearsal, everybody left, and the guitar player, who I won't mention who it was, left it on standby. Okay? So a month or a month and a half later, I go in there and I look at the amp, and the pilot light's on. And I knew when it was used last. I went, oh my gosh, I'm sick. I'm just sick. I just didn't know what to expect. So, how badly did I turned it back on, it works. What did I actually do?
You didn't hurt anything.
Andy Simmons, right?
No. It wasn't Andy.
It was Andy.
No, it wasn't.
That was a guy that looks like Andy.
We know. Oh,
And for this Quentin, yourself. Okay, on behalf of Quentin, I'm going to give the rebuttal.
All the standby switch does is it turns off all high voltage, but it keeps the filaments going. The filaments are the heater part of the tube. Now there is some theory, I've never really seen any proof to it, that causes tubes to age because of the diode effect on the blah, 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 and all that. Truth to tell, no. No harm at all. If there was any harm at all, and I doubt that there was, this is from me saying that, it would have been that the tubes would have aged not nearly as fast as if they were naturally operating, but a little bit somewhat. So, no. No. And the only people that I've ever heard hear that theory about you shouldn't have the filaments on without some high voltage on them is the most whacked out high-end audio tube geeks. And we tried to cater to them for a short time and just gave up, you know, and it was like, no, I want to deal with the musicians, I want to deal with people that I share their craziness, not you guys. And the trouble with those high-end audio fire guys is that they are frustrated because they're not musicians is what I think. You know about this gear, holy smokes. And it really bugged me because we made a couple of products that were marginally successful. I got terrific reviews. You had to go through a whole different dealer network, which was a nightmare in itself. And I heard the guy say, and I was trying to be reasonable. You know, our prices on the amplifiers that we make are reasonable, but based on what does it cost to make them. And a couple of hi-fi guys came through reviewers came through the factory. Then they were looking at stuff like the bass amps and, well, how much does bass 400 sell for? I'm going, I don't remember. I had 1,100, 1,200. 1,100, 1,200. This should be like $4,000 in the audio. I'm looking, kidding, you know, I'm looking at what these people are saying. Anyway, so that was one of my goals, was to make this stuff affordable. And then I heard this guy said, oh man, I bought the Tigers. That's a wonderful amp. And man, I put this new power cord, I got this, and the Tigers cost like, what, $2,200, and that's retail with a 40% margin. That was the other thing. Margin was crazy I thought for this stuff. Anyway, I put this $700 power cord on it, and you should hear it now. I sold the wholesale on the amp was probably $1,500 or $1,200 or something like that. This guy made a power cord for half the price that I made this whole amp. I'm in the wrong business. Can I reveal you with another rock story? Yes.
Well, I was just going to say, does anybody else have any other questions that they want to fill out?
Anytime. Yeah, you can just raise your hand.
Yeah, I've got a question. Yeah, I bought my first Boogie in 1982, which is a Mark IIB combo, which I still have today. And you know how that goes every 80s and 90s. You sell and trade, and that's the only thing I kept since then. But my question is, when you're back at the shop doing R&D, do you just randomly swap out components and values, or do you have a vision, a tone, a vision in mind? With particular tubes to use, or you know, variable transformers?
The answer is all of the above. Yeah, it goes back somewhat to what I was saying. Is that we have a pretty good idea of what we're doing after all this experience, and we have a pretty good idea of where we're going, and we'll make a decision about, you know, what kind of power tubes and how many of them, for example. That's a primary thing. You don't want to, you know, okay, we're going to make this one with 606s, we're going to make that one with EL84s, for example. So we make those decisions. A lot of it is an evolutionary process, and the best thing that I can say is that I like to think of myself as continuing the legacy that Leo Fender started, because without him, I certainly wouldn't be here. It's like looking back, you know, again, for you car guys, there's two great engines, Ford Flathead V8, which was the hot rod engine until the small block Chevy came along, and then that became the hot rod engine. But without those, there would be no Eagle Rock, there would be no hot rod guys. None of that would exist because, you know, we don't have a foundry. I can't go make an engine block. Now, Leo, the history as I understand it is that a lot of that was just basic circuitry from the RCA2 manual, where what RCA wants to do is sell tubes, make tubes and sell them to end users. I don't know how much I agree with that, because the circuits that I love from the Fenders that I think we have all adopted, they're not in any of those RCA2 books. There is some basic stuff in there, all right, but the circuits that have come to define what guitar amplifiers and what electric guitars are, they're not in there, so he deserves a lot of credit. People ask me, okay, so you have no engineering experience, you have no electronics experience, how do you know, how? I don't get it. And I said, okay, think about the combination of a backyard hot rod mechanic with no degree in engineering. He can make that engine work sweeter and better and more powerful than that engineer. You've got a different approach to it, for one thing. Also, think about your favorite Italian chef. He doesn't have a degree in nutrition. He doesn't have a degree in organic chemistry. And whose food do you want to eat? This is why I'm the luckiest guy in the world. When I mentioned this earlier, I want to go back and refer to my grandmother. I can't believe I give thanks more often than you know for swerving into this industry and finding something that allowed me to truly live the great American dream here and make a business out of what was, yeah, sure, it was a necessity, but it was a hobby before it was a necessity. And the other thing that's so incredible about it goes back to the thing that I mentioned about my father and the saxophone, about the timelessness of the musical instrument. My way of thinking, tubes still rule, and you know, we got modeling, we got solid state, we got all kinds of stuff, but we all know what the source is, and it is tubes, and it also stems from the original Fender circuits. Modeling, somebody asked me about modeling, and I said, well, I'll just give you an example of my experience with a guy who was playing a dual rectifier, and he just wouldn't stop. So I finally walked over to him and said, well, yeah, I guess you like that amp. He said, I've never experienced anything like this. It's unbelievable. I said, you never played one? No, I've got the model version of it, but I've never played the real one. And I said, well, how do you compare the two? And he looks and he says, how do I compare modeling with the real thing here? Well, it's like my girlfriend versus a Playboy magazine. That was pretty good too. Yeah, it's a facsimile. There's got virtues, obviously, the convenience factor of modeling. But I don't know if the seduction is there. I like to think that it isn't. Because again, it doesn't have all of the characteristics that we work so hard to achieve on an amplifier. One of them is that it invites you in, it makes you want to play, and enables you to play above the level that you thought you were capable of. Spoils you. And that's what a good horn does. That's what a good musical instrument does for anybody. Guitar amps are really fascinating though, because look, two main guitars, Strat and a Les Paul, right? But how many different styles of music come out of those two different guitars? We could spend hours naming them, the different versions of metal and country and clean and jazz and so forth. But what's the difference? Amplifier. Same guitars, the amplifiers. What you're really listening to more than anything is the amplifiers. So a lot of people have told me, you know what, if I had a choice between a good guitar and a lousy amp, or a lousy guitar and a good amp, I'm going to go for the amp, because that's what people are going to hear. Well, this inspires us to be super neurotic, because one of the guys, probably Doug West, anybody remember his name, is one of the main guys at the shop? Yeah. When he got his first boogie, he grew up in Mill Valley, where our second store was. In fact, he says I stole his first guitar, which I don't remember, it was so long ago. But nevertheless, he got his first 100-watt 112 combo when he was 11 years old. And I said, Dad, did your mom buy that? Oh, no, I earned the money. He said, she earned the money. How did you do that? Mowing lawns. I said, Doug, don't bullshit. There's not enough lawns in Mill Valley. He said, okay, so I sold some reefer at school. Whatever it would take. And he's into the 30 years of Mesa Boogie. I don't know, I was introducing somebody around and I said, oh, here's Mike Mindanao. And he started painting my ceiling of this house that I was building. I said, Mike, how long have you been working here for Mesa? He said, 39 years. So I go around to one of the ladies that does the wiring. Marie, how long have you been working here? 29 years. And so we started to run a little average here. And the average, and again, if you look at it, it's a factory because we manufacture stuff, right? The average person building Mesa Boogies has been doing so for 17 years. So they're not beginners, they're not, they got a level of commitment. Let me put it that way. In fact, I shouldn't even go here because I'll probably shed a tear. I was so touched with this one gal, Canfoshe Fomata. And I was in, my wife passed away at the beginning of the year, and I was fortunate enough to have fallen in love since then, which I never thought was going to be possible, especially so soon. So I was introducing this wonderful dude. And Canfoshe jumps off the stool, gives this lady a big hug, and says, you take good care of our boss, because we love him so much. Anyway, I'm not a boss. I didn't take any business classes either, in case you were wondering about that.
How did you meet Steve? How did you meet Steve?
How did I meet Steve? Oh, well, you know, that's the only good thing with that high-end audio deal is that truly, and that's a good story. Steve, you ought to come up and tell that story. It's your story. You want it? Or you want me to just give you a quick, okay, here's what happened. We're at the end of that. We were kind of bailing, but there was some hi-fi show, you know, esoteric.
Yeah, AES show.
Yeah, well, it was an AES show, yeah, and there's over in Moscone Center or someplace in San Francisco, and I didn't even want to go. It was like, no, count me out. So Doug West was over there, a.k.a. Tone Boy, 11 years old, first book. Right, and Steve recognizes this just physically. He's like looking at him and saying, are you, correct me if I'm wrong. And anyway, those two hit it off so well. And Steve's like, man, I had nothing but problems. So I had this amp, not boogies. He said, I had this amp and that amp and this VHD and this. And I can't, everything blows up. It doesn't sound right. And so somehow, these two started really hitting it off. And Doug said, well, you want to go to the factory? It's only Petaluma. It's less than an hour. North of San Francisco, we'd be there in 45 minutes. Off they go. You guys stayed up until dawn, right?
Yeah.
I'm in the Tone Lounge, as we call it.
He opened up the whole factory to me. I mean, this is just how we relate, these guys relate to other guitar players, which I've been there now for almost 21 years, and I can attest, we all love this guy, because he runs it more like a band than a business, and he's always said that. And really instills that entrepreneurial spirit in all of us. But, so Doug opens up the whole factory to me. I had got the tri-axis and a 290. And I said to him, I said, man, you saved my marriage. You don't understand. My wife said, if I brought home one more amplifier, it's over. You guys can relate to that, right? And search for your sound, right? So when I found this, it was just like the grail, and I recognized that. And I'm thinking, this guy he treated me like I was the most important person, the most important guitar player on the planet when he spoke to me, and he meant it. And then when he invited me to the shop, he opened Randy's office. I was sitting in your chair. I sat in your chair. I thought, who does this? So he's showing me, he's pulling out prototypes, which we've got a lot tighter with that in modern times. But at any rate, we're going through everything. I have a meeting at 6 a.m. because I'm looking for tasking. That's why I'm at AES. It's 4 a.m. I'm still at the factory, and I've got to be at a meeting at 6 a.m. So I had no rest. I get back to my hotel. First thing I do is just call my wife and go, you're never going to believe what happened. Why are you calling me so? You're never going to believe this. And I said, I got to go right to work and do a whole trade show game. But I don't care. That's the plan. And it's been 21 years, and it's just gotten better and better because we're doing what we're passionate about.
And thank you for joining up, because what you brought to it all is incredible. And in fact, on so many levels. We were in search of a title. You know, some companies are big on titles. Like Doug's got a good title, Tone Boy. So that's what we came up with Steve was either deacon or ambassador. I'm not sure which one we ended up with. But it was like he covered too many, you can't say, oh yeah, well, he heads up marketing. Yeah, he does that too. Well, but he contributes all sorts of ideas. Yeah, well, everybody does that because most of the people are players. And we'll take suggestions from everywhere. Play testing. We've got this syndrome, the Texas curse we call it, and it's hilarious because Doug and I will be working on a prototype for months, right? Months. And with Doug, it's all about the magic. That's the whole thing. Doug is Mr. Where's the magic? And the last 1% is the most important of all, and so forth and so on. And then we'll get, oh God, Steve's going to flip over. Wait, when we send this, and Doug's got this childlike enthusiasm that's just wonderful. And we send it to Steve, and he's like, well, do you realize that the fax loop doesn't work, the graphic is backwards, and this, that, and it'll be like 60, Steve will, the typical like 2.5-page, comment list of stuff that's just wrong, but you're right, it's magical.
So if we can figure out these problems, we're going.
That brings up another topic that's interesting. Now, it's a challenge to make a magical amplifier. It's a far bigger challenge to make them all that way. And I really devoted more time to trying to suss that part out. Because again, you can make, and Fender has made, magical amplifiers because of the randomness factor. But, I'm thinking most guys aren't going to have more than one of our amplifiers. And I want them to love it. I want it to be this thing that invites them in and that they aspire to, like everybody aspires to a Ferrari. Well, you don't want to be disappointed if you finally get your Ferrari out. Gee, I'm not good. What was that? No, I want it to be one of the magic ones. So I cannot tell you the amount of time that's been spent, but it's more than half on sussing out what are all the elements that determine and distinguish the magic amplifier. And of course, when we're R&D an amplifier, we're finding that, we're getting it. But then, this is why we did the blindfold test. This is akin to the hammer test. It's another one of these things. I don't know if anybody else does it or not. But I realized this, okay, now I make the second prototype that's getting closer to something that's actually manufacturable and buildable, because it's not just this big mess of wires and stuff. And then, okay, Doug, let's compare the two. So here's the later version and here's the original version. And I watched it, and it'd be like, plug into the one that we've been working on. He's like, oh. And as soon as I move the plug to the other one, he's like, his whole body English changes, and he's suspicious right off the bat, right? He's like, no, it doesn't. feel the same, doesn't sound the same. So what we had to do in short was blindfold him. He just turns around, we don't actually put a blindfold on. And then we do the random switching back and forth. Because we get to a point where, and I've got a very keen ear, because I might have a hard time hearing you sometimes, but boy, I can hear harmonics and stuff, you know, because I've been doing it forever. And he and I have developed not only the same instincts, but a language and the same characteristics. We like to hear the harmonics all just really line up in the best possible way. So it's vocal, and in some cases it's got an attitude depending on what amplifier we're going for. You don't want all of them totally sweet sounding, but you want to be able to have that organic, that natural harmonic alignment that's just really pleasing. Okay, to back up for a bit, that's one reason why I've always used printed circuit boards from the very first amplifier. Printed circuit board. Well, what would you do with a printed circuit board if you only made one? I made the circuit board. I went to the surplus store and bought a giant sheet of copper-clad glass epoxy, cut it up, made the silk screen on the etch resist. I made a tank with a hot ferric chloride acid and acid etched the board. Then you're left with the pattern of traces, and then I had a drill press and then drill all the holes in it and then stuff it. And I was doing that to try to achieve this kind of consistency. I know there's a whole bit about the hand wire and all that, but yeah, you know, I can show you in a lot of cases where you move parts around and it changes the way the thing sounds, and or it changes the way the amp feels. Now, not every part, it's not like completely crazy, but there are definitely bunches of parts where there's a preferred location, and you want it right there. Parts themselves, we use 1% tolerance resistors. The industry standard is 10%, and that means 10 up and 10 down. So this one could be, it's supposed to be 100 ohms, this one could be 90, and that one could be 110. Well, and then we've got 100 ohm resistors, you're never going to get 2 amps that are the same. Then there's other tricks that I'd love to be able to tell you, but they're really deep trade secrets because they've taken us so long to suss out. But suffice it to say that these trade secrets are wired into each and every amplifier and then concealed in such a way that no one can ever tell we've done what we've done. Because we don't want to let the cat out of the bag, because it took me too long to figure this out. And it came about with the Dual Recs. We had the first Dual Rectifier was just, by the time we got it up and going and went through this whole months-long process, it was just, we were beside ourselves loving it so much, but we could not duplicate it. We could get really close. We could get what everybody would say, oh man, that's just production differences. But with Doug, it's like, no. That amp, everybody is going to freak out on. This amp, it's a good amp, but it's not that amp, and it's like that diminishing returns kind of deal. And literally, there was 7 or 8 months before I figured out, and again, completely non-scientific. Any engineer would tell you they're blowing smoke, they're crazy, and we came up with a couple. And I said, I want to make sure this is not going to be close, because I'm hearing the difference, you're hearing the difference. It's subtle, but it's there. And you know, the more we do this, the more we get closer until we finally really exactly got it. So we took a bunch of the other guys from the shop. They're players, right? They're good guys. They're good players. And we went through the same process with them and verified again that, oh no, man, that's definitely, you kidding me? Yeah, there's no question about that. But once again, it was one of these things that engineers, in fact, I would love to have this conversation with engineers, some of the tube engineers that I've talked to at that actual factory when I was working on the 6L6s with Sylvania. And, you know, it's just like, really, guys, come on. It reminds me of this paper that I was given. He said, you ought to read this. Here's this PhD super guy that wrote this 32-page paper on whether it's possible in an audio circuit to hear the difference in different construction of resistors. And he's got charts and graphs and formulas, and he comes to the conclusion that maybe, but I'm not sure. And I'm thinking, I said, bring that guy in, that's good, empirical. Why didn't he try it? Because I can take one kind of, you can even take the same kind, but 2 different brands of resistor, and they'll sound different. But you take a carbon comp, or you take a metal film one resistor in one place, and there may be 300 resistors or more in an amplifier. You can change one of them, and not just one, but dozens of them throughout. And here's this engineer. I don't know. It may be possible. I'm thinking, did it ever occur to you to just try it? So yeah, I guess that's that pioneering, the empirical, the magic of musical instruments, the beauty of not knowing where we're going and how we're going to do it, but when we're getting closer, we know we're on the right track, kind of thing. So keep it interesting.
I don't know how you do that with all the resistors. We have a hard time with just preamp tubes, testing them, sitting there for days.
Well, you know, and we have to look at that from a practical standpoint too, is that we want to make sure that that the randomness of the tubes is not, because we've been shown, you know, in years, check this guy's preamp, that's so great, and it'll be like, well, this is a dual spec tube that you can't get, and this is one that the guy said, yeah, that's great, but you can't, you know, that's a one-off, you can't do that. Because you can't get those tubes, and, you know, yeah, I don't know, that's what makes it so good. Well, I plays our stuff now, because it's, you know, so we have to take that into consideration, is what is available. Transformers are an interesting thing too, because we've told some of these secrets to our transformer guy to try to see if he understands. Can you give us a theoretical example or understanding of some of these magic elements that we come up? And he says, I absolutely can't. And then I said, well, you're sworn to secrecy. He said, I understand. You guys are 80% of our business, so we're not going to do anything to upset. So we got a whole transformer company that's, we're 80% of their business. They jump through hoops to keep us happy. So same kind of thing. Like the old guy told me, he said, son, an output transformer is half science and half black magic. It's the black magic that counts. And that's a guy who was an engineer, but he had been dealing with it. He actually got that. And so we will change grades of steel, change types of wire. And I'm not talking about changing the voltage. These are transformers. You can measure the voltage, you can measure the sag under load, you can do everything, and they spec out identically. You listen to them. No, completely different. That's an old-timey sounding one, that's a modern sounding one, this one's somewhere in between. And it's really pretty fascinating how much stuff is observable that is not measurable and goes absolutely contrary to any of the known engineering specs. Those are only good up to a certain point. The only thing I use those for, and I barely even understand them, is to make sure stuff's going to be reliable. So like I measure things and go, okay, what's the maximum? Okay, we're in a good place here. We're not going to be breaking these things up. Want to hear another rock and roll story? I was just reminded of this one. It was pretty funny. Do you have any other serious questions? Yes, sir.
Of all the artists you work with, who is the easiest to work with and who is the most interesting?
Good questions. I was going there automatically. Keith Richards and Ronnie Woods, they're the easiest and the most fun. Yeah, I'm sorry that the guy that I used to be, I had two good friends that were part of it. One of them died, and the other guy's Pete Thompson's main guy, so he was only there once in a while. Those guys are so down to earth. They are so cool. I was just about to launch into a story on them. So early in the days when Santana was playing this little snakeskin book, the Stones were doing, and this would have been the 70s, middle 70s, 76, something like that. Stones were headlining at Madison Square Garden. And Carlos tells a story, I've heard him tell it a couple of 3 times at any rate, it's a great story. He said, so me and Bob Dylan are going to the garden, and I got an amp in the back of the cab right between the two of us. I got my boogie. And because I've been told that the Stones might invite me up to, do an encore. So, I need an amp because I'm Santana. No Santana tone, there was no sustain, especially back then. Nobody had copied the stuff yet. So he says, yeah, everything was great, the show, and they said, yeah, going up on stage. So set his amp on stage, he said, they all looked at him and they went like, dude, like, this is Madison Square Garden. We're the Rolling Stones. You brought a practice amp? Because it's like a gender person, right? He said, no, notes and holds it, and he said, Keith just went. Well, a couple of days later, I get a phone call. Now, at this time I'm living in this place built by the truck that got running around through the pear orchard and all of that stuff. And it's Ian Stewart, the unknown stone, and he's asking me about, I want to get some of these amps and, send them to us on, whoa. Meanwhile, I can hear Keith in the background. I said, excuse me, is that Keith in the background? Kind of tell him what to say. Would you put him on, please? So Keith comes on, he's just friendly, he's just a super nice guy. Yeah, man, I really want to, this amp, man, Santana, shoot, yeah, I've never heard anything like that before. Can you send us? I said, well, man, I'm sorry, you're going to have to pay for it. No, hey, we're the Rolling Stones, we haven't paid for gear in forever. We don't pay for it. I said, yeah, I understand, but look, I'm just a starving cat out here. This is my only source of income, and I'm barely hanging on here. Besides, I knew this would get him. I said, if I was capable of giving amps away, wouldn't it be better to give it to some broken down old blues player? You guys are raking it, man. In fact, you got nothing but tax problems you're raking up the dose of. Yeah, you're right. So I get comfortable and confident with it. So I said, look, Keith, look at it this way. I back-ordered almost a year on these amplifiers. You don't like the amp. Here's what I suggest you do. Helps your tax situation. You pay me. You write it off tour expenses, right? Send me the check. I'll bill you the amp. You get the amp. You don't like the amp. You sell it for cash. Buy drugs with the money. And then the long pause, and I'm thinking, maybe that went a little bit too far. He says, yeah, mate, that'd be a great idea, except I don't want the amp, I want 6 of them. I already tried Santana's, and I want 6 of them, and I'm not selling those things. But otherwise, that's a good idea. And you run with those guys, you hang around with them, and you realize it's phenomenal, and it does exist on a level that is kind of hard to imagine. First of all, behind every cabinet, there is they call it a bump. It's set up so that between each song, you get a bump. That's the way they roll, at least in those days. And it's impressive. That's all I can tell you. But when you meet the guys and talk to them, they're down to earth, easygoing, super grateful, gratitude. They make no difference of who you are, whether you're some famous guy or a total nobody. As far as I can see, it made no difference. Matter of fact, I've seen them in Oakland, Paris, London, San Francisco, and I wanted to introduce my wife to, we were waiting for Keith to show up at a pre-tour rehearsal in Oakland Coliseum, and Ronnie and Mick and everybody's there, so I was going to introduce Suzanne to Mick. And Mick, he's again a lovely guy. He's standing behind the drum kit. He's, oh, lovely to meet you. Trips over the thing, knocks over everything. The whole drum set, all the cymbals go down. Sounds like a junkyard falling down the staircase. And I'm totally embarrassed for him, and he gets up like nothing. I'm lovely, darling. Lovely to meet you. No problem. And that was funny because you hear those guys and they're killing time. They're waiting for Keith, waiting for Keith. And they're noodling around, and it's horrible. And I'm sitting there with another old friend who used to work at Leo's Music, which was the happening place in Oakland. And he said, this sounds like the worst Saturday morning at the store, man. I mean, nobody's in tune, nobody can play, everybody's just noodling and whining. This is awful. And I'm glad you said that. I was kind of thinking the same thing. And then, well, Keith's up. Okay, the sound check was called for 1 o'clock. It's now 6 in the evening. Keith woke up. Yeah, he's up. Okay, great. So we can get him these updates. Okay, and then it was like around 9 o'clock. Okay, the limo's underway with Keith. And around 10:15 or so, the back door of the Coliseum load-in comes up. The limo comes in. Keith gets out, and he's got the whitest shirt I've ever seen. That must have been some Egyptian cotton. He was just like, holy, wow. It was just the build-up and all that. It was almost like waiting for the Stones himself to go on stage. And so my friend Alan is up there, he's the guitar tech, and so there's a staircase that goes up to the stage, right? And I saw this handoff that it just blew my mind, because Keith's going on, he's got the Marlboro hanging out of it, and he walks up and he takes the guitar with one hand and hands the 44 to Alan with the other hand. This is huge shooter with his barrel. It was like, you know, the kind of thing that Dirty Harry carried around. It made my day. It was like, holy shit, you carrying that thing on? You know, and he straps on and he gives that death look to everybody. You know, nobody there except crew and a few of us other guys. And bang, and forget about it. It's the Rolling Stones. That's his band, man. I mean, not to shortchange anybody else, but Keith, a force of nature, man. The guy is amazing. Bill Graham was there. And Keith is walking around all the time. He's saying, okay, all those seats over there, can't sell those. And Graham was, yes, sir. You know, Graham, oh, wait, you know how much we're going to get for those seats? And he was, yes, sir. There's a balcony over there. You see those behind this column? Can't sell any of those. Okay, yes, sir. Keith was running. It was impressive. That's all I can say. So Keith, he is rock and roll. He is the icon. How he survived. He says himself. He says two things about that. Only the finest quality, and the first buzz is the best. So don't keep chasing it that long. That I don't think he lives up to that. I will tell you the connoisseurs though that. I shouldn't cover here. Yeah, never mind. Okay. Next
Of all the amps you've built over all the years, is there any amp that is your laying in bed not going to sleep that you get that smile on your face and it's just that?
Absolutely. You know which one it is? The one I'm currently working on. It's the one.
He means that it's whatever one he's currently working on. But yeah.
Not the one that I'm working on right now, but the one that I'm working on, you know, that year, the next year, the next 6 months, whatever. It's that one. I'm totally immersed into it. And literally, there are times where, because see, you have to visualize, it's really, here's the, I think it's a good deal. Now, again, I have great respect for how they do it at Yamaha, because they're going to have somebody that designs the cabinet, somebody else that designs, or maybe a team, and then some other engineers that design the sheet metal chassis. They're going to have somebody else that's the circuit guy who's come up with the circuit. There may be 2 or 3 of the power supply guy, the audio guy, the power amp guy. That's probably what it is. And then they got somebody that's going to design the circuit boards, the actual, you know, traces on the circuit board. I end up doing all of that. Now, how they end up putting all of that together, I don't know, because for me, it's like this giant puzzle where you have to see the combination of the pieces and the puzzle put together. And so literally, there will be these times where I'm sitting there and going, yeah, but if this is here, then that's in the way for that. And this really needs to be over here, but the transformer's got to be there. And, you know, so there will be literally times lying in bed as these are like, oh, okay, wait a minute, what if this was here and that was there and this was backwards from the usual way, then that would, and it would be like that kind of, just to get the big topography going of the thing. Now, again, of course, not every amp is completely unique. There's a huge amount of evolution that, you know, I like to stand on my own shoulders after standing on Leo Fender's shoulders. Well, I already laid out how much of this can I, you know, put from an earlier amp in. And it's something that we had to go over with the Underwriters Laboratories, the UL guy, when we finally had to get adult enough to deal with that whole nightmare. And I said, look, here's the deal. Warning Blender, they have 2 models and they make hundreds of thousands of each of them. So you guys is a piece of cake. We got 50 models and we make small numbers of each one of them. And they're all important to our whole fiscal survival and our customer base. We cannot afford to pay you these multiple $10,000 to go through all of these. It's just a done deal. So if you want our business, you're going to have to work with us. And let me show you the commonality. So this gets back to what I did about the design thing. I said, look, there's only a couple of different power supply configurations that we use. And look at these capacitors. These are all custom-made caps. We can supply you the manufacturer specification, but you're going to see these same patterns appearing over and over and over again. So do it once, and then say, okay, we already know is the audio and the cosmetics. And that really doesn't have anything to do with your safety concern. By the way, the first thing the guy said was, geez, looking at your stuff, it's really well built. He said, you know, our concern is fire and shock hazard. And I can tell just by looking at that neither one of those is even possible because you use all metal chassis, which is really rare these days, fully enclosed transformers, and everything is super well grounded. And being a wise guy said, great, so sign us off then, we're done, right? That's not it. So you got to go through, insane tests. The one that's the most difficult, one second, is, what do they call it, their fault condition, where they turn the amp up to full blast for 4 hours. Now, that wouldn't bother me, except that they use 132 volts coming out of the wall side, and that does make it pretty tough. And then, even though the amplifier won't fail, there's a formula that you use to measure the temperature rise in each transformer winding. It's the change of resistance. So you measure the resistance of the copper wire cold, you measure the resistance of the copper wire after 4 hours. There's a formula you can apply, and it will tell you how hot each individual piece of wire is in the power transformer. And then you've got these certain limits that you can't go beyond. And he even admits, he said, no, this is nightmare for everybody, total nightmare. So anyway, we have to deal with that and have to pass that. So favorite amp. Okay, there was a question back here. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say that, number one, I'm honored to hear you speak, so thank you for coming out. Certainly, I appreciate that, and I've always seen you as a genius, and I see you in the light of Jim Marshall. So again, thank you for coming out. There are two questions, actually. I just wanted to know, number one, have you met Jim Marshall?
Just for me, please.
Have you met Jim Marshall, and have you guys compared notes?
I've met Jim Marshall, and no, we did not compare notes. Jim Marshall is not an electronics man. I don't know if you know that. And to be perfectly honest, I held him in great reverence for everything that he's accomplished, including starting out as a drummer, being a drummer. And I sensed that he didn't want to talk to me because we're a big threat, and he doesn't know electronics. So, I was talking about the price everybody owes Fender, and I was talking about earlier Fender Tweed Basement 0004, classic blues for in my mind. It was the good fortune of Marshall and Ken Brand, the guy who actually was the electronics guy at Marshall, to use that circuit. Again, it didn't take a total genius, but he could have used another circuit. As a matter of fact, Fender abandoned those great circuits because they were going the wrong direction. They were looking for less capability of distortion, more hi-fi, more clean headroom. And that's what happened when they went to the Blackface series that they probably proclaimed over the Tweed series, which was less gain, more negative feedback in the power section, which makes it tighter and cleaner and more like a hi-fi amp. And they were more into surf sounds. The idea of distortion, like it is with all engineers, is something to be avoided. That you don't want distortion. So what was so brilliant, it worked out so well for Marshall, was not only that they picked the best circuit, in my opinion, one of the most musical that already has a legacy of tone built around it, but they used EL34 tubes. Now let me get technical with you for a second. And the reason they did was one of sheer economy, because 6L6s were much more expensive in Europe. RCA has had a patent on the 6L6. It's called a beam power tube. Now inside of a vacuum tube, first thing is the cathode. It's the center. Inside the cathode is the filament. That's the glowing red thing. The cathode is covered with an electron-rich coating. When it's heated, all these electrons tend to bubble out of it, just like you see, you open a bottle of champagne and the bubbles start to come out. You heat up this cathode, the bubbles, the electrons are released from this cathode material. The cathode is always negative compared to the plate, which sits out around. It's a big metal structure outside of it. So negative is attracted to positive. It's just that simple, basic magnetism. So those electrons want to flow from the cathode out to the tube. The simplest tube is a rectifier tube, it's a diode, that's all that happens. The electrons flow this way. They cannot flow back that way. They only flow in one direction. And that's how you change AC to DC. AC is going both directions. You put a diode there, it can only go one direction. So that's the first thing. Then, what I believe the guy was Marconi came up with was the control grid. What if you put a fine winding of wire, like a coil spring, in between the cathode and the plate? And what if you charge that such that it controlled those electrons? So if it was more negative than the cathode, then it would repel them. You'd have the influence of the plate out here trying to attract them, but you'd have this grid which creates a space charge, because it's mostly open space, right? But there's wires, and it's like I hold my fingers up there, it's mostly open space, but there's this coil of wire that's more negative. So it's trying to repel the electrons. Then, if you alter the voltage on this and make it more negative, it repels more. When we make it less negative, then it lets more of them go through. And that's how amplification works. You change a slight voltage on the grid here, and it either pushes back a whole lot of electrons or it lets a whole lot more flow through. That's how amplification occurs. Got that? Okay. Now, in order to make that work even more effectively, there's another grid called a screen grid, which moves the influence of the plate closer because it's positively charged. But it's also another set of windings. It's mostly blank space with this fine coil of wire around it, mostly spaces. What RCA had a patent on, and what makes the 6L6 such a genius piece of design, is that those two grids, the screen grid and the control grid, are perfectly aligned. And when I was back working on developing the super rugged, our super tubes, that still these days, even though Sylvania doesn't make them anymore, is still a basis of all the tubes that we get that are made in Russia and China. It's still a basis. That alignment is really critical. And so when you see tubes of different grades, it has to do with how precisely those are aligned. And what we do is we have an extremely tight range. So the most extreme that we have from the most, our range is about, our entire range is about what one category is on most of the other tube guys, if that makes any sense. So in other words, they're almost all the same. Okay. EL34s. In order to get around that patent, that was a tube made for hi-fi stuff, which never goes into clip, where you overdrive the thing. I'll get to that in a second. So in order to get around that patent, they could not have the two grids lined up. So the second grid, that screen grid, is wound to a different pitch. Instead of being, say, like 10 turns per inch, it's 7 turns per inch. So what happens is that instead of them being perfectly aligned like that, you get to places where they're like this. And what happens when you, and this is the good and the bad part about why Marshalls with EL34s made it so good, and also why they blow up, is, no, literally, is that EL34 is more power sensitive than a 6L6. In other words, with the same level of input signal, you'll get greater amplification with an EL34 than you will with a 6L6. So it's like turning up the gain. Everything else is the same. You put in an EL34, the gain goes up. Gives you more distortion. Rock and roll, distortion. That's what we want. We want distortion, rock and roll. Now, the reason why they blow up is because when you clip a tube, what literally happens is there's so many electrons going to the plate that there's not room for all of them to adhere. So instead of going there and stick it, they go there and bounce off because it's already covered with them. What happens when they bounce off is they go back and they get stuck on the screen grid. And in the case of the EL34s, where you've got these, every 5 turns, you've got one that's right in the middle of the electron beam, that little sucker right there is glowing red hot. And you can look through. There's one reason why I was really reluctant to use them and only did so when I figured out a way to prevent extreme screen grid meltdown. That's why they blow up all the time, because if you look inside, you clip an EL34 and look inside, because there's little holes in the plate, you can see just a row of red hot dots in there where the wire is just melting. because of those electrons are sticking to the wrong grid. Okay, I probably lost most of you, but they started with the right circuit that already had more gain, and they used a tube for economic reasons that had additional more gain. I don't have to mention the 412. I mean, that's a rock icon. Everybody's adopting that. Yes, sir.
Two questions real quick. Is there a product that exceeded your expectations, whether it be in the past or now, that you just did not expect?
Dual Rectifier.
Dual Rectifier. Can you tell us a story about that and your story with Metallica? How did
Metallica?
Yeah.
Okay, Metallica are 2C guys. Metallica used to come to the shop when they were little kids. And here's this funny, in music too, we used to have a lot of little kids that were coming, whose brothers were in some of these bands that we talked about. And I remember yelling at one of them, "Hey, eat that ice cream cone outside before you handle the Les Pauls." You know? And we were selling gold nuts for $300. Vintage Strats at 175. Anyway, okay, but back to the Dual Rectifier. Yeah, we concocted this notion, we're going to call it the Stylus series, just amongst ourselves. Where we were going, you know, we got the Mark amplifiers, and Mark 1, we were up at the 2B or C, I'm not sure where we were at that time. And there was this little bit of some people's, yeah, but man, they're kind of like Swiss Army knives, you know, they kind of do everything, but, you know, like a Swiss Army knife, they're really not that good at doing anything. You know, that was one of the negatives that we would hear. You know, a lot of guys, everybody was playing, Metallica, Gillis, and Taylor, they were storming. But there was still this issue among some snotty LA guys about, you know, so we said, okay, let's address that. It's actually easier to make, and much easier to make an amp that really only does one thing than to try to get an amp that does several things really well, like Mark V. I mean, it's 5 times harder, or 9 times, way harder. One trick pony, bring it on, piece of cake. Especially when basically all these guys do is copy a well-known circuit and build it really well. And they have even admitted that they don't know these secrets of consistency that we've got, because Doug, aka Tomeboy, went over and checked out some of these, you know, the super high-end handmade amps, because he knew some of the guys there. He said, well, let me try that one. And the guy said, well, not that one. That's not a really good sounding one. Everything at $2,800 for a one-trick amp, and that's not a really good sounding one? Who's the poor guy that's going to buy that? What are you talking about here? Anyway, so to answer your question, though, we came out with a Blue Angel because, oh man, it has a massive volume and foot switches. And, you know, one of the guys, we had a really hardcore blues guy working at the shop at that time. I tell you, he's so hardcore, he drank himself and he's gone. He's gone. We supported him for years, but he died, he killed himself. With his devotion to the blues, and actually he was Doug West's next door neighbor. So if that gives you an insight into Doug West, aka Tony, Mitch Faber, and man, that guy could play the biker bars, and he was born to that. But he was the oh man, massive volumes, that's for sissies. Foot switching out, and don't even want it. You know, he really wanted a Fender crank. That was his thing. So we made the Blue Angel out of, you know, trying to keep him happy. And of course, once we discontinued it because it didn't sell that well, everybody, oh, that was the best amp you ever made. Oh, the Blue Angel. Anybody here ever had a Blue Angel? See what I mean? Another one was the Maverick, and it was a similar, it was a 2-channel amp, and it did foot switch, but it was a would anybody ever have a Mav here? Yeah, did you like it?
For a while.
For a while. There were guys, and there still are, that's their amp. They absolutely love it. There's a blues band in Palm Springs, Cal David, who is just like, he walks on water as far as I'm concerned. Not just his playing, his singing. He is the real deal. He's from Chicago. He's a white guy that grew up hanging out with the heavies. Muddy, and you name it, he's like, oh yeah, I grew up there. I lived at their house, you know. So he's a Mav guy. And Maverick was just it for him. So, in the meantime, what's also happening down in LA is the modified Marshall craze. And, you know, no clean sound, just a jacked up Marshall, basically a boogieized Marshall, you know, extra gain added to it. So we decided, well, let's do that one too, because that should be part of the Stylus series. That became the Dual Rectifier, and immediately the sales. We were floored. I mean, we made the acceptance to that so far exceeded, I mean, again, we had no expectations, we didn't know what to expect, but man, that floated the whole company for about 15 or 18 years. Not that we didn't make everything else, but the numbers of dual rectifiers was more than everything else put together. I'll tell you another funny story about that. At one of the trade shows in Anaheim, a guy came up to me and he said, yeah, I'm blah, blah, from Studio Instrument Rentals in New York, and I want to congratulate you on the dual rectifier. That's a real icon. I go, yeah, thanks. And he goes, no, you don't get it. That's an icon. Yeah, thanks. And I said, no, you're still not getting it. He said, we got 21 in rental, and we got more and a bunch more in New Jersey. They're all completely rented, and you don't know why? And I'm thinking, well, yeah, where else? No, he says, here's why they're an icon. It's Fashion Week in Manhattan, and all the top designers are there. Last year it was Harley Davidson's, all the models, every stage that all the high fashion models were on, they're all draped with Harleys and stuff like that. This year it's all dual rectifiers with diamond plate. She said, that's where they all are. Nobody's ever even turned any of them on. That's what I mean about a stylistic icon. So that answers your question. That we were shocked. We were totally surprised. Now it's the Marks, of course. The Mark 5 just keeps going. And you guys all know that we've made a little bit smaller, more compact versions of it. Blowing our mind again, because I can only say because it happens to hit what people are looking for, and it's what they need, it's affordable, and it's practical, and it sounds great, and we love making it. And it was a hell of a challenge to get the best of all of Mark V and shrink it into that little package. That took me 2 years to design that circuit board and get all that stuff fitted in there. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, speaking of Mark V, I've had a Mark V for a little over 5 years. I love it. One of the things I wish I could do is to more easily access all the different within the channels within the channel, so to speak, all the voice thing. Was there ever a thought about going and using MIDI to do that? And is there a potential in the future to see that kind of a revision of the Mark V?
Yes, but I can't tell you any more about it. Steve would have me walk home.
We're all friends here. We're all friends. We won't say anything. We'll leave this room.
If there was any internet, you know, don't tell me. I love that.
Don't tell me.
We'll hold Steve down. We'll hold Steve down.
To answer the question over here, look, it's actually most of the stuff that I can't tell you about.
But soon enough. But I think what you're asking too is the complexities out of making the loads switchable, because you're really switching to different circuits that really require a complete control, or you wouldn't be satisfied. That's why I like the Mark V, the Mark V, it's 3 fully independent channels. Now we give you 3 modes within there, but they each require different setups to really get the expressiveness you need to get out of each circuit. It's like where the gain set, we're all tone control for a second. We just don't want to do things that will give a person foot switch ability, but then not give them the performance that they need. Because inevitably what you'll be asking us for is, yeah, but now I want it to sound like this when I switch it.
You see the trouble with what Steve is saying.
That's why, yeah.
Is how many amplifiers are supposedly channel switching or mode switching? They only have one set of tone controls. Now, admittedly, they don't call Steve and complain. But our customer, on a Fender, Hot Rods, or whatever, are pretty good amps, but it's not uncommon at all to have a channel switching amp that, by the way, I never even told you guys about that story. I'm screwing into that, but maybe you already know. Anyway, it's something that I brought up with Steve. I even showed him, like, Steve, check it out. When you send up channel 1 on a Mark 525, mini Mark, as I call it too, you can switch from clean to crunch without touching the knobs, and it's shockingly good. No, you can't do that because people are going to complain. I said, okay, this is a case of the glass half full or half empty, because for a whole lot of people that would make it a 3-channel amplifier right there. Yeah, but we're going to get the complaints because you don't have separate dial ability and the volume's going to be different and the volume needs to be a little bit louder. And I said, it is, partly because that's a dual gang pot on the master, because the circuit's so completely different when you go to crunch. So anyway, everybody says, and also Mark III, Mark V already is 3 separate channels, which this will never be because you just couldn't fit it. But any of you guys that have got Mark V 25, you should try it sometime. Set up your clean pretty much the way you would, and then just hit the switch to crunch. I think you'd be pretty shocked by how much you don't have to dial anything to get a totally diggable sound. Now, maybe if you're recording, you might want to tweak it a little bit. But if you're just on the gig, or you're just hanging around, try it. Okay, who's next? Yes, sir.
One thing first, just thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your contribution to all our mutual passion. It's amazing that moment when we put the standby up, it's hard to meet that moment when we learn for a good time. But I'd really like to hear a little bit more about the evolution of what made you design the Mark V.
Okay.
The idea of having you have 9 amps and 1 amp you're giving us here.
Okay. First, I want to thank you, everybody here, and the legions of players that aren't here, that have trusted us with their tone and with their hard-earned cash, because it's been so fulfilling for me. Like I said earlier, I feel like I won a lot of it because I got to live the American dream, which is getting harder and harder to do, especially in California, where I'm from. And when my grandmother landed on the member with the other wagon, I think she would have stopped in Texas if she had known what was going to happen. But thanks to you guys, all the players everywhere, because it's a dream come true. You know, like I said, you look at people that are engineers, they're obsolete after they don't have like a 10-year work life, and it's like, well, why do you want to hire that guy? He's obsolete. He's at the point where he wants more money, but his technology is older. Luckily for me, using instruments, vacuum tubes, same thing. They've been doing it forever. So, yeah, and I get a huge kick out of it too. I do not play guitar. You don't want to hear me. I haven't picked up a guitar in years, and I never have played guitar other than I could do some. I had a little test routine, but. I get an enormous satisfaction from Steve, from all you guys, but I also get it from Doug West too. When he goes into his little prayer dance because he's the magic and he's really feeling it. I can't tell you how good that makes me feel because it's a real accomplishment. And to be able to pull more spirit out and more inspiration out of people makes you feel good. It's better than designing garage door openers.
Do you know where your first Princeton modified is?
Yeah, it's still with Barry Melton, and he still uses it. It's still with Melton, and he's... Pardon me? The value of it? He wouldn't sell it. I don't know what the value is. I'll tell you this, the first Mesa amp that I built, it was a bass amp. It was a Mesa 450. It was a little snakeskin rectangular head. And I made it for a guy that ended up becoming such a good friend. I didn't even know him at that time. His name was Patrick Effing Burke. And he was so persistent. He said, "Oh man, I've heard your criticism. I want you to build me a bass amp and everything." I said, "Well, I don't know." "No, you're going to build me a bass amp." And yeah, I had no money. This guy's younger than me, but he was a super fast talking guy. He started stuffing $100 bills in my pocket. When he stuffed 3 of them, he'd stop. "Okay, I'll build you a bass amp." Man, I can get through the summer on $300. So that's what that amp cost him. I bought it back for $5,000. But it was also from a guy that I kind of knew who had come down with cancer and he had doctor bills and all of that. So he gave me the opportunity to do good things. And that was the thing. I thought that was a good thing to do. I got an amp back. He has, helped him out in his time of need.
Are you matching those prices today?
Sorry, I have more questions. Are there any engineers out there nowadays, amplifier engineers out there that you expect or get some inspiration from?
Any amplifiers that I keep track of?
Yeah.
Other than our own, you mean?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I hear about some of these modeling things. What is it, Fractal and the other one, the Kemper or something like that? I hear about those. And I had an idea for a product that I thought would deliver true analog vacuum tube in a package that would be, for our kind of customers, a huge improvement over that. We decided not to do it the way I was thinking about it, but an even better way. And that's way in the distant future, and sorry, Steve. But it doesn't compete with anything else that we make right now. Anyway, so it's not a question of, oh, I'm going to wait for the top secret, whatever. No, and I tell you, if we ever get this project finished, it won't be for a long time anyway. But yeah, I think you get the theme here, tubes, analog. I can barely use a computer, much less write code and do all that stuff. So that's what I keep coming back to. One of the most fortunate things that happened to me is that what I'm skilled at hasn't become obsolete yet. Now, there have been attempts along the way. Solid state, of course, even the Yamaha. In fact, there's a funny story for you. Got time for one more funny story or two. Back in the early days, I had one dealer in LA, and it was Valley Arts Guitar, and an amp repairman there was Paul Rivera, who actually now makes some amplifiers. And he said, you know, all the studio cats, Larry Carlin, Jay Britton, all those guys, they used to shop at that store. It was a great store, gone, a long time ago, gone. But he called me up one time, he said, Randy, you're never going to believe what's happened. I've been hired by Yamaha to help them with a big R&D project because they realize they're not getting over with their amplifiers. So what they hired me to do is to put together all the top studio players and stars that are in town, and all the top amplifiers, including theirs and some prototypes that they're working on, so they can do an evaluation, figure out where they're going to go. Okay, fine. He calls me a couple of months later and said, well, I got good news and bad news. I said, okay, lay it on. He said, well, the good news is that every guy chose the boogie in every category. I said, well, that is good news. He said, the bad news is that Yamaha's going to copy it. And I said, well, I guess that was the whole point, right? And so they literally got done with their Spectrum analyzer with Larry Carlin and the 335 and all of that. And but this project was really delayed, and they had decided earlier on they couldn't use vacuum tubes because they didn't have any knowledge and you can't mass produce with vacuum tubes like you can with solid state stuff, blah, 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 blah. And so he said, well, they ended up doping up their end to make their own transistors, and he said they went through over 10,000 different transistors on the way to try to get the Larry Carlin thing and all that. You guys know the name of Tommy Tedesco? He used to be the top studio guy. You know, like he was on all the TV shows, all the channels, 2/3 of the movies and so forth. Yeah, and here's where it gets fun. Now, y'all probably remember a Fender Rhodes piano that had tone bars in it, right? Okay, so when they're interviewing Tedesco, when he's doing the amp thing, the guy said, and I'm just relaying what I was told. He said, picture the Japanese engine, your buck teeth, big glasses and all that. What bad clipboard and laptop on. Oh, Mr. Tedesco, what is the difference of Mesa Boogie and Yamaha? And Tedesco goes, Brian, you hear that? The boogie's got balls. So Rivera calls me back and he says, you ready for a laugh? I said, anytime. He says, you know what, one of the things that was holding them up after they did all the transistors and all that? He said, they bought so many boogies and they kept taking them apart looking for the bars. He said, they just got rid of them. Oh, these guys are bars.
Kind of maybe an ending question here. Can you talk a little bit, without giving Steve a stroke, about what your philosophy is going forward over the next year? Where are you going? What's your ideas without getting as specific as you want to get? But
so you remember how I began this story? You
don't know where you're going. You're just going to wander aimlessly. You're just going to
chip off the block here. I still love doing what I'm doing. And I intend to do it as long as I can. We've got the greatest group of people, and like Steve says, we either operate like a band or a family. It's really not a business. And when you look at the books and see that we're not making any money, that's further proof that, that we're Like I said, we're all doing well. Times are tough. Worldwide, times are tough. And we do, right now, over 40% of our business is outside of the United States, which we're enormously proud of. This era in the 80s, when everybody was saying, oh, Japan, they just have conquered the world. Japan's buying everything, they're owning everything, manufacturing and all this stuff. We were shipping at least one full-size 40-foot container of electronics, hand-built in Petaluma to Japan every month, sometimes two. And we thought, yeah, we're poster boys. Again, here's the deal about California and why you guys should be glad to be here. Fender, no more iconic company than Fender, no more wonderful company than Fender was. And again, why am I still doing this? I'm digressing here. I hope I remember the California bit. But when we had this little store and I was repairing amplifiers, Leo Fender had his big health concern and thinking he wasn't going to live any longer, he sold to CBS. And immediately, the amplifiers were changed, the guitar quality went down, nobody wanted any of that stuff. Now, I didn't have a crystal ball at that time, and I never thought I would be in a place like this talking to a group of fans and loyal customers like you guys all are. But I said to myself, what a freaking mistake. Boy, if I was ever in that position, the last thing I would ever do is sell out to some big corporation and let them screw everything up. Hope that answers your question.
That's good.
Okay, but now where was I going? See, I'm calling on you guys. California,
Texas.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, this was just a bash California. So Fender gets bought, right, by, I forget who it was, the money guys, basically. We know nothing about amp. I don't care. There's an opportunity, let's jack this and they'll pour it out, make huge bank. So they move it to Scottsdale, Arizona, because of tax reasons. They don't want California. So what does California do? It drives them to come back to California. It gives them this huge incentive, all of this, well, you won't have to pay taxes and we'll pay you to come back to California. And I'm raising my hand going, wait a minute, I never left. Where's my reward? Oh, right, your reward is highest tax bracket and we're auditing you. So I never said that, but you know.
There's some land up here in Frisco. Come on down.
I told Steve when I woke up this morning, I said, Steve, I got bad news for you. And he thought I was going to tell him the toilet was stuck or something like that. I said, no. He said, what's the matter? What's the matter? I said, I'm moving in. I gained one of the greatest accidents that ever happened in my life. Because one of my real dear friends, Lee Michaels, he had a few hits playing piano, B3 and singing. But he wanted to play guitar because he had a good idea too. He said, you know, I want to be right where your flesh is making the note. With a Hammond, it's a button and a tone wheel and a Leslie and all that stuff. So he got into guitar playing for a while, but he's also a real tech, gyro, ear loose, just crazy guy. He always had like hot rod, go-karts, and whatever. He just, anything that was wild and crazy, he wanted. So he got these Crown power amps. And this was the first of the big high-power amplifiers, and they're almost like laboratory amplifiers, right? They're big solid-state monsters, and I don't know how to work, but they're incredible. And he said, God, I have so many people going on Fender and acoustic and 2 or 3 other brands, and people trying to make me preamps that work with these Crown power amps, and they all sound terrible. Nothing works. How about you? You want to make something? Because he just drifted into croon music. And I said, okay, I'll try it. So being a Fender guy, I started with a Fender 410 circuit, right? And then I'm thinking, I have no idea what kind of signal it takes to drive that Crown. So I'm gonna cover my bases. I'm gonna put another whole tube in here, and I'm gonna put a whole string of potentiometers, like volume controls, so that I can find out empirically again. That's how I roll, empirically. And I'll just adjust these, and then we'll find out, you know, how much gain and where it should be and all of that. So I build this thing up, and I go over to his house with a beautiful Marin County brown shingle place. His wife is delightful, gorgeous. Any surfers here? No, we're in Texas. His wife was in all the Gidget movies and all that. She is the goddess in the background all the time. She hung with Mickey Dora, who was the guy that basically invented California surf culture. He's like the like Charlie Parker of the surf world. Okay, so here I am, and I'm intimidated already because it's like Lee Michaels and his gorgeous wife and their big studio and all that. And he's got these big 412 caps and the big crown amp, so I got my little preamp here and I plug it in, it doesn't work. And I'm going, oh, man, and I can hear this little tiny sound coming out of the speaker. And I started to unplug everything to go home and figure out what was wrong. And I realized, Lee, you plugged the preamp right into the 412. It's not even plugged into the power amp. He's like, oh, really? We straightened that out. And of course, by this time, we got everything turned way up because we're listening to this tiny little signal and it hits this note. I swear, our bodies just recoiled. It was like 600 watts through a pair of two stacks. And we just couldn't believe it, what we had just heard. And then we got down to dialing these controls, and we couldn't believe what you could achieve by adjusting those three controls. At first I was thinking, well, I'm probably going to leave one of them out. We'll just find a preset where it works the best. But no, the fact that you could dial up these and dial down that, you could get the biggest, loudest, authentically clean Fender sound. Or you could go the other way, and we discovered these previously unheard of realms of high gain because they were previously unheard of. And again, when I finally filed for a patent for this, the patent attorney called up and he said, well, my son turned this over to me. I want to, and he was the guy I was dealing with. He said, let me give you some background. I am the retired head of the patent division amplifier arts section. And son, who wrote this patent? I'm thinking, I'm in trouble. Well, sir, I wrote it. He said, oh, really? Well, this is the best written patent I've ever read. And I thought, really? Wow. And he said, but it won't work. Yes. Sorry, sir, what? He said, it will distort. And I beside myself, I'm thinking, wait a minute. How could I have written it so well, and yet the guy didn't get that the point was that it would distort? Anyway, long story short, where that went was, I should pull my pockets out right now. There's two sections to a patent. There's the specification, which is the part that I wrote, that's in common English with the history, the background, what you did, why you did it that way, all the way down to the specific part by part, what does each part do and all that. Then there's a second part called the claims, which uses this really arcane legal vocabulary to try to describe the invention, on the one hand, broadly enough that you anticipate minor deviations that would steal the essence in an attempt to get around the patent. And at the same time, you've got to be cautious of drawing the claims too broadly where they would throw the door open to prior art that isn't the same but would nevertheless invalidate the patent. And those geniuses managed to do both. So, as you know, pretty much every amplifier made since I burst on the scene like a worn-out condom has managed to use high gain and low gain presetable foot switcher, which is all I described in the patent. But their description, I mean, I went through several patent cases, and we were on a roll. We won the first one, got a great big settlement, which apparently is really rare. We went through the second one, and we were heading towards Fender, right? And we went through the second one, and it was even longer and more antagonizing, but finally we got them to admit that the patent was valid, and they had infringed it, and they simultaneously went bankrupt, so they left us with a huge bill, and me with a huge lawyer bill, and they didn't pay anything. And of course, what they were doing was dragging it out and flooding the market. And this was the famous acoustic 136 or something like that. I forget. It was a total part-for-part knockoff. It was really interesting to hear these people, oh no, we designed that. Because, oh, yeah, right, how come it happens to be the same? You know, and they couldn't answer, there was a bullshit line. Anyway, so I called up Fender, and I said, you know, Fender was owned by CBS at this time, and the guy said, yeah, please do sue us. You ever been to Manhattan? I said, yeah, a long time ago. He said, do you remember seeing that CBS tower there? That's really one of the big buildings in town. There's like 5 floors of lawyers. When I go up there, those guys are throwing spit wine nearly enough work. Whether you're right or not, bring it on, buddy, because we will bury you. You will die trying to sue us, assuming that you're right. And life's too short. I'm an amp builder. Screw it. I'm going to make amplifiers. So that's how that wound up. If any of you guys got a great idea and want to get a patent, see me, because in most cases it's not worth it. It's kind of fun, but I mean, it's something, you got a nice piece of paper, big deal, but no, doesn't do what you want it to do.
Keep being an amp maker.
Right.
Keep being an amp maker.
Keep being a manager. Do what you love, and you know, that was a case where truly all amp is, people have said, geez, every amp is based on that patent, pretty much. I mean, not every one trick boutique amp. By the way, as Steve said, but you were the original boutique guy. And I said, yeah, I was just a starving guy. Literally, the year that I started making amplifiers, despite the jacking up the houses and building the Mercedes-Benz engines, we had a vegetable garden that grew only zucchini, and we got damaged fruit out of the back of a market in town, where it was a pretty high-end market, the food villa. And the guy saw me out there looking for it, and he said, I said, look at these peaches. He said, yeah, they got bruises. I said, can I have them? And he said, sure. And he said, well, we can't sell them because they got bruises on them. I said, well, the rest of it's good. He said, I'll just come by. I'll just keep putting them in this corner for you. So that's where this started from. That was a summer to remember. Wow, this has been great fun. Any more questions? We can sign some amplifiers or anything you guys want. The more I can do for you, the more I feel like I've been paying you back for what I owe you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm a bass player, and I travel a bit and speak to a lot of the players. And all I wanted is, will Mesa possibly come out with a high-powered walkabout sometime in the future? A high-powered walkabout?
Well,
you know.
Yes and no, it wouldn't be a walkabout. Unfortunately, it was high power because what keeps happening is that everything keeps getting bigger and heavier and so on and so forth. There is an issue. You know, so many people love walkabouts. I love hearing your story about the heart amp. Cindy, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a great story. Yeah. So walkabout, terrific amplifier. It is what it is, and it does what it does very well. Beyond that, high-powered, yeah, the other amplifiers use circuits similar to the walkabout, but they aren't the walkabout. So it isn't the same, not really. So.
Because I have the Impulse 600, it sounds really good, but it still sounds different. And is there any chance of Mesa doing Class D, do you think, or is that something?
I can't answer that.